money. So for every progress claim, there is a percentage that the owner retains. Okay, that's now required to be put into a trust account, so it's secure. Okay, so that's a commercial contract. It is unusual for that to happen on a residential contract. So it sets out, protects retention money. So under this contract, that must be protected. The owner can't go and spend it. Oh, I've just got 100,000 we've kept off the contractor. I'll go and buy a new Maserati. No, you can't do that. It has to be protected. Helps to ensure a fair, balanced, appropriate payment regime. Provides a fast, cost-effective adjudication process. What is an adjudication process? If you are the contractor, you are the owner, you get into a dispute. All right, he's refusing to pay. You say, oh, but you owe me this money. I've done the work. No, because you haven't done it to the right quality. That is a dispute. So you can take that dispute to an adjudication. And so I am appointed as an adjudicator. So I am the adjudicator. I step here between you two, and I listen to what you say, and I listen to what you say, and I make a decision, or an adjudication, a decision. And my decision as the adjudicator is binding on both parties. So the Construction Contracts Act sets out a formal process for adjudication or dispute resolution. Now this applies now to residential construction. And it provides enforcement mechanisms to recover unpaid. So sorry, if you don't pay the money, and I've told them that you owe the money, all right, you owe them now. It wasn't 100,000, we've adjudicated, it's only 80,000 you owe them, and you say, no, I'm not going to pay them. Okay, there's a recourse to law, so you can end up in district court, you can end up fined. Okay, so there is a whole legal process that sits in behind those decisions.
Okay.
So, another time.
Okay. 有个设法就是
5 minutes.
5 minutes break. 我们加一下那个微信，加一个群哈。现在大家到微信通讯录里面，到微信。
I'd done some plumbing work, and I wanted to be paid for my plumbing work. And the contractor turned around and said, sorry mate, can't pay you because the client hasn't paid me. When the client pays me, I'll pay you. Okay, that was a paid when paid arrangement. And that was causing a huge amount of stress within the industry. So as a small subcontractor, I needed the payment. Okay, my cash flow for that month depended, I needed to pay my workers, and I wasn't being paid by the main contractor. And the main contractor was saying, that's it, tough. I'll pay you when I get paid. So the Construction Contracts Act in 2002 was meant to address some of those types of issues. And it only applied to commercial construction. So it wasn't working effectively. So the government has changed the legislation. And so we now have the Construction Contracts Amendment Act, CCAA, 2015. And it's done some streamlining. So the first and most important thing is that that legislation now applies to residential and commercial construction. So someone in the residential section has full access to the dispute and payments regime set out in the Act. So it's meant to secure payment for contractors. and subcontractors. It's trying to secure the payment, making sure that the money flows through the system. And for the first time, consultants were also included. So design, engineering, and quantity surveying consultants are now covered by this legislation as well. The adjudication process is streamlined, settling the argument, the dispute, that's been streamlined, and the enforcement process is strengthened. Even if the adjudication decision isn't complied with, there is some enforcement. So there, once again, there's a link there to the changes. So it applies to the residential construction sector, and it is essentially about streamlining payments through the system, okay, and providing resolution when there are problems or disputes. So payments under construction contracts are usually made by instalments or what's called progress payments. So in the contract, in your conditions of contract, there will be a payment schedule. Generally, I will pay this amount at this time when the foundations are in. I will pay this much when the roof is on. I will pay this much when plumbing first fix or whatever is put in place. So that's a payment schedule of progress payments, and that is set out in the contract. Okay, under this Amendment Act, there is now provision for a one payment agreement, so not progress payments. So this whole argument, I'll pay when the client pays, or I'll pay when I get, may or may not apply because you're only getting paid once. So parties can refer disputes to adjudication, which I've talked about already. And the new legislation provides clear examples of what sorts of disputes there might be. So a dispute about the amount payable under a contract, for example, a progress payment, or the reasons given for non-payment. No, I'm not going to make this payment because the client hasn't paid me. I've got no money. I'll pay you when I get paid. Okay, that's clearly a dispute. So about the amount of payment or about the non-payment, whether there has been a breach in terms of the contract under the Building Act or under the contract. So if there's a breach, okay, you can apply for an adjudication under this legislation. So moving on. So that's a very, very quick run through of the legal context and the contractual context that you may find yourself in. It's a framework, but I'd like to emphasise that the law applies regardless of what your contract says, and you cannot contract out of the law. So bear in mind and remember, any residential work over 30,000 requires a contract. So the schedule or bill of quantities in the tendering phase. Each contractor tendering for a project has the ability to price the work exactly on the same information, and it's a minimum of effort. So the quantity surveyor has prepared a list of all the material in the project, and they have measured it, so many meters, so many meters, so many square meters, so many cubic meters. There is a list of all the material. Your job as a contractor is to price that. Okay, so many square meters at $110 a metre, at $95.54 a metre. You have to put your pricing in. But everyone is pricing the same amount of work. Okay, where it gets competitive is those possibly better rates. So you are buying material at a cheaper rate than your competitor, so you may get a competitive advantage based on your purchasing power. the rates that you can put into the schedule. The other area where you will be competitive is what's called the preliminary and general. Okay, these are costs that are associated with the project. Okay, so in a residential project you have to protect people and you have to protect property. Okay, and you have to comply with the safety plan that you have submitted. So what does that mean? Oh, it means I have to fence the property. I have to put a safety or security fence around the property. Where do you price that? Where do you price that? That is a cost on the entire project. You can't put that with the cost of concrete. You can't put that with the cost of excavation. You can't put that with the cost of timber framing. It is a general cost across the project. What's known as a preliminary and general cost. And so you have to estimate those things, and the scheduler quantities will not quantify those types of items. And that's where also you may get a competitive advantage. So your assessment of those preliminary and general items may be different from your competitor. So while you're using the schedule, there is still opportunity to get a favourable outcome in terms of price. But it means you don't have to measure all of the work. Avoids duplication. So cost of tendering is very expensive. The cost of tendering is very expensive. So you've got a small house, yes, you might be able to cost that sitting at the dining room table on your computer one evening. It's unlikely. Or you go to placemakers and they shove it through their software and they'll come up with a quantity list and a price. But what about a large project? Okay, we all drive through the Waterview Tunnel. The cost of tendering that project was in the order of $14 million. $14 million. So each of the bidders spent $14 million. And in that case, there was a selected tender. There were originally 3. 1 pulled out. There is now 2. There were 2. The same thing is now happening on the City Rail link. Okay, 2 tenderers. And on the City Rail link, it will be the same. They will have spent 10 to 20 million preparing a tender. One of them is going to miss. One of them wins. Okay, I've just lost the tender. I wasn't successful. I've just spent $14 million and got nothing. How many times can you do that and still stay in business? So it's expensive. So you have to be successful in winning the tenders and you have to recover some of those costs that you've incurred. So the only way a contractor recovers cost is on projects. They recover their overhead costs on projects. So you might be the manager and you spend your day wandering around this site and you spend wandering around this site and I go and have a lunch and and I finish at 2 in the afternoon and I drive a nice car. Who pays for that? It's the projects that pay. Okay, the projects have to be profitable to cover all of those overhead costs. And so they have to be built into the tender. So in the case of the Waterview Tunnel, we just lost $14 million. We have to try and recover that on the next project. So we put a margin into the next project. In the case of the Waterview Tunnel, they had to submit, and it will be the same for the rail link, they had to submit a construction plan or a methodology. Okay, and the client on the Waterview Tunnel liked some of the methodology that the losing tenderer was going to employ. So they said, we would like to buy the intellectual property from you so that we own it, so that we can give it to the successful tenderer. Right, that was like, oh, okay, thanks. Okay. And in the case of the Waterview Tunnel, the New Zealand Transit Authority paid the losing tenderer $10 million for the intellectual property. And then they said to Fletchers, here, use some of this methodology, because we are confident about using this, okay, but we're not going to give it to the other competitor. You use it, because we now own it. So in that particular case, the losing tenderer regained some of the cost. But tendering is expensive. That's really my point. And as a business, how do you recover it? You recover it on the next projects. So you have to price that into the next projects. Here's my clicker. I'm only down to 30 minutes now. So, the basis and role of schedule of quantities and tendering and construction process. That's what the descriptor says. And so how does the preparation schedule conform to NZS, New Zealand Standard, once again, 4202. New Zealand Standard 4202 is standard methods of measurement. This is like the book that quantity surveyors follow. This is the standard that quantity surveyors use. So 4202 standard method measurement is to provide a uniform or a consistent basis for the measurement of building work and for the presentation of units of measurement in a schedule. That's what a quantity surveyor does. Uses NZS 4202 to measure and produce a schedule. Schedule or bill of quantities describes the work to be executed. Reference is made to the drawings and the specification, so the quantity surveyor measures the drawings. So in the old days, historical days, they took a drawing, the architect's plan, they got their scale rule and they measured the length of the wall. Okay, they physically measured off the drawings. These days it's all done electronically. In goes the model, the BIM model, press the button, all the quantities are immediately available. The difference between the old days and now is that the drawings in the old days were two-dimensional. They were two-dimensional. They were just lines. These days, architects and the consultants use three-dimensional models. So not only is it length and breadth, but also height. So the drawings contain volume. So the model is now a 3D model. And so if you have a 3D model, you can automatically measure the quantities. So the wall has length, it has height, it has thickness. You can measure the volume. So that this is now a much simpler process of measurement, because it's all done through using the 3D model or using the BIM model, building information model.
For the quantities are they using like O2 CAD, or they're using special tools to measure?
Yeah, they're using special tools, and it's proprietary software, and the software that most quantity surveyors are using in New Zealand would be a product called CostX. Yeah, CostX. CostX. Okay, you can download an educational version off the web if you want to. Okay. So my point is that quantity surveyors are now using the BIM model to measure. It's much quicker. So in a sense, the term quantity surveyor and measurement is like an old-fashioned redundant term because they no longer physically measure stuff. Okay, but you ask a quantity surveyor and they'll say, well, I don't think you're a quantity surveyor, I think you're a building economist. No. I'm a quantity surveyor. And I said, well, show me your business card. And so this quantity surveyor gives me his business card, and what's it got on? Building economist. Right. So, but it's this whole measurement process which defines them as a profession. This is what they do. This is what they hang on to. Okay, but they are quantified, and it's unfortunate. I'll probably come up better on your print version, is it? The little example of a schedule. Okay, 5 or 7 column take-off paper. Known as 5 column or 7 column take-off paper, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So this is a quantity surveyor. This is what they do. So the first column is the description of the work. The second column is the quantity that they've measured. The third column is the unit, whether it's square metres, cubic metres, kilograms. The fourth column is the rate. Okay, and if you're using a schedule of quantities like this to price a project or tender a project, you put your rates in there. And you multiply the rate by the quantity and it gives you the amount in the final column. Very simple. Okay. But it's a uniform process of takeoff. Okay, and that little snapshot there is an example of a schedule of quantities. Okay, a large project, it'll go to pages and pages and pages. And each trade or each element is measured. So there are some standard rules. Under 4202, there are some standard rules which I've measured there. So, sorry, which I've put down there. So the material is measured net in place. So if you're measuring weatherboards for our house has got weatherboards on, the quantity surveyor will measure the size of the wall. Okay, it's X metres that way, and it's X metres that way, so many square metres net. However, you know, what about wastage? What about overlapping? Okay, so there have to be rules for those sorts of things. So there are rules around about wastage and lapping and materials cutting. Okay, there's an allowance for overhead and profit, establishment and maintenance. So that's a schedule of quantities. There's some further rules of what quantity surveyors do. So the first thing is measurement is measured net, fixed in place, which is what I've just talked about, exclusive of laps, corrugations, ribs and otherwise specified in 4202. Okay, so it's measured net in those units. Stating dimensions, in what order do you state the dimensions? The length, the width and the height. The length, the width and the height. So there's a standard. It seems quite simple, but it saves confusion. So these are part of the rules. Okay, oops, went the wrong way. In terms of rates or dollars, sorry, we talked about that. I went back the wrong way. So bills of quantities or schedules of quantities are primarily used as a tendering document, but they can they are prepared by the employer's quantity surveyor. Each contractor is able to price the same work. The preliminaries and scope of the work contained in the detailed lists of drawings, so it references the job, and it provides the basis for variation, pricing of variations. So it's just some useful standard documentation. Okay, but for many residential projects, it's unlikely that you will have a professional quantity surveyor providing that schedule to you. It's something that you as a contractor will have to prepare yourself as a pricing document.
但实际上你再看一下，50万，比如说是一个排水的管线 ，drainage stormwater 或者 wastewater 的管线，你会发现它那里面可能是预留的200米的50万，但是呢，那个60万那个人呢是算了400万 ，double 他的换算，但是他的价格是10万，那就是说这两个人他 reading 这个 drawing 的那个形式不一样，他搞错了，有一个人。但是如果你提供给他，你这个活就是200万，那他就可以。那个人400米那个人可能就降到30万，就有可能所以这个情况是很好的。但当然 ，house 的这个如果是 residential building 是比较容易来做的，所以不需要大家不会差那么远，比如平方或者去算，或者你就直接告诉他我是250米房的，或者他算出来是248，那就算252。超不了多少，所以这个会很大。但是呢，我相信大家可能经常接触到分割的这个房啊，外面的 drainage 啊，还有外面的车道啊，这些东西的，还有很多这个外部的这个东西，它的量也差，所以你报的时候它是算，即使它算出来这个人，代表你这个方面设备算出来不准确也没关系，因为它让你找到了一个它的锐度。然后剩下的申请对他来讲就是 variation， 他按照你的提供的说是500方，他按照500方报完了结果呢，做出来是1000方，那你再配台1000方，但是呢，起码你知道它的这个 rate， 它的当价是最低的。OK， sorry。
No, I'll just add to what Frank had said and say that without a schedule of quantities, when it comes to evaluating tenders or bid prices, it becomes very difficult to try and bring them onto a common basis, right? Because this tenderer will include A, B, C. This tenderer will include B, C, D. Or forget about A. Okay, and so when it comes to evaluating these two tenders, you have to get them, they're doing this, and you've got to line them up. Okay, and that's quite difficult. What has this tenderer missed? What has this tenderer missed? Okay, and so you've got to bring them together. The thing with a schedule of quantities is that they should come together like this, and so you compare one with another very easily. So it's much easier for the contractor, and in terms of evaluation of the bids, it's much easier to evaluate the bids. Okay, sorry I'm rushing through this stuff a little. So there's a lot of material here to get through this afternoon. So final section is on monitoring. And to a significant step, monitoring. What sits behind construction monitoring is a whole lot of administrative process as well. So there's stuff that happens directly on site, but it results in a whole lot of administrative work. So that's why we put it in here. So the context is that monitoring should give a clear view of the project's progress. So you're monitoring the project's progress, and it allows you to address problems before they arise. issues of time, issues of quality. So is the project running late? Is the project running ahead of time? What happens when the floor layer comes to lay the floor and the flooring contractor says, I am not going to lay the vinyl flooring on that concrete? Why? Because I cannot deliver the quality that you require if I put my vinyl on this concrete floor. Okay, and it'll be a case of this one. If I want to put vinyl on this floor, you'll get vinyl on the floor, but it will do this. Okay, the specification says it's got to be flat and free of defects. But the problem of the flooring came way back in the concrete, where the concrete wasn't delivered to the required quality. The concrete wasn't finished level, wasn't finished screeded smooth. The quality issue was way back early in the project. So the monitoring that is undertaken is determining and certifying or passing on the quality requirements right through the whole project. So it says there, it allows progress to address problems before they arise. So for the floor layer to put the vinyl down on the floor, there is now an extra step that is required. The extra step is the floor has to be ground smooth. Go through my pricing. Ooh, there's no allowance for concrete grinding. Oops. How much is this going to cost? Oh, it'd be really cheap, mate. You know, it's only going to cost you $6,000. Oh, it's not in my price. Okay, why are you going over price? It's because you didn't manage the quality issue way back at the start. So monitoring is important, because you don't want to transfer problems to the end when they become expensive to fix. Construction monitoring also verifies the work is completed and consistent with the plans and specification. Okay, that's part of delivering on the scope of work, so that you know consistently that you are delivering on the scope of work, that you are building to deliver the final product. You are monitoring progress. So construction progress monitoring is done in conjunction with a contractor's payment claim request. So you're also monitoring cost. Client or owner, if I am paying progress payments, I want to know that I've still got enough money to complete this job. So the owner is concerned about cost to completion. So you're building my house? That's right. You're building my house. I pay you 70% of the cost. All right. Then you, for some reason, your business collapses. You go broke. I'm left with no contractor, a house that's half finished, and I've paid 70% of the cost. You come in and say, oh, I'll finish your house for you. Okay, it's only going to cost you the same amount as what you've already paid. Oh, that's 70%. Hang on, I'm going to pay 140% for my house. So my problem was, I'd paid you too much. Right, I should have only paid you 50% because I wasn't leaving myself enough money to complete the house. So my progress payments were too high. Right, because you were telling me it was 70% complete, and it wasn't. It was only 50% complete. And so now I'm left with having to pay more to get the same product. So a client will always ask, forget about how much I'm going to pay, it's how much to finish the project that's important to me. Okay. So monitoring of cost is important, and that can be, that's a significant thing. And cost to complete is a very important measure. So what is monitoring? Monitoring process is described in accordance with the contract, documents and organisational procedure. So there will be some expectations in the contract, general conditions of contract, under the heading schedule, which is saying this is how the work is going to progress. So there is, and that's part of the contract. So within the contract there are these requirements. And so monitoring is important to ensure that you are in fact maintaining the conditions that you contracted to. Recording and reporting is described in accordance with the contract documents and organisational procedure. So the organisation will have monitoring processes in place as well. But what I'm pointing out is that there are contractual obligations as well. So monitoring control tracks and manages scope, cost, time. A well-defined schedule or timeline of work may be required by the general conditions of contract, which, as I've said, provides a structured approach to planning and monitoring, identifies problems before they arise, forecasts cash flow, and assesses resource requirements. That is a schedule of work. Okay? A well-defined schedule. And what is a schedule in this case? It's a timeline program of work activities. So this is the work, we've broken it down into increasingly smaller and smaller activities, and we've put that activity onto a timeline. We are going to complete this work between week 6 and week 8 of our contract, and there will be dates on those weeks. So that's a schedule. Okay, and a fundamental and important monitoring tool. So we can monitor the progress against that schedule. So we've got an example up there. If you turn the page, there's an example of what I'm going to talk about and what Frank's going to talk about.
I just got to say, we have a separate section.
Yes.
To teach it, all of you how to do this, how to do the monitoring, how to control, and how to develop this schedule, Gantt chart schedule, or Gantt chart program. 我们有一个单独的一个课，教大家做。
So this what I'm talking about today is very much an introduction, okay? And I'm just saying that this is a process that sits, an administrative process that sits behind the contract. And there is a whole topic on this that comes up, okay? And within construction companies, there's whole teams of people that this is all they do. Okay, I have a friend, a professional colleague, who consults internationally on this stuff. All right, so he is like a troubleshooter. Oh, our project is running 6 months late. Help. Can you help us, please? Can you help us by rescheduling the work, by doing the work in a different way? Because we need to speed up. Generally, if you are behind, what most particularly small contractors will do if you're behind schedule, what they'll do is they'll try and go faster. How do you go faster? Oh, you hire more people. Okay, you put more people on the project. Oh, how come we're still late? How come we still haven't caught up to the schedule? Sometimes you've got to take a fundamental, the way to catch up is to take a fundamental approach and change the construction methodology, that change the order that you're doing things. So my colleague, he flies around the world looking at projects that are in major problems, where the contractors behind, and he's got huge liquidated damages or damages being applied to them. So he's currently in Denmark looking at a project. Okay. He has a particular approach which is called location-based management, where he looks at managing the work through a location, not by activity. Okay. So there's a whole, it's like a science that sits behind this stuff. All right, and if you ever wanted a good career, become a really, really good proficient scheduler, because there aren't too many of them around. Anyway, so this is a schedule of activities against time, and you can see how it's being used to monitor the work. So here are the activities, and these are the weeks. We said that we were going to start this project at the start, and it was going to be finished by the end of week 10. And we've scheduled all of those things. That was our plan. So we've got all these activities against time. Now what we're doing here is we're now doing a monitoring step. So this is today's date. Okay, this is Friday the 22nd. Where is our project? And so this is where art and science come together. You understand what I mean? So this is about judgment. So they are saying here on this summary that they are 57% complete. Okay, so there's a whole lot of professional judgment, and there's a whole lot of tools that do sit behind that decision. But ultimately, they're saying our project overall is 57% complete today. The problem is that that's not 57, right? That's today is 70%. We should have been at 70%. But you see, this activity here is not up to date. This one, well, it's a long way behind. It should have been finished back here, still going. This one's close to being on time. Okay, and this one hasn't even started. All right, so we had a plan, and we're not keeping to the plan. So the monitoring is saying, we've got an issue, we've got a problem. So we've got to address the progress on these activities. And that, as I say, is not as simple as just putting more people on the project. There may be some more fundamental reasons. So that is a very basic tool. As you say, as Frank says, you'll go into that in more detail in one of the sessions. But that's like the very basic stuff that you should do, even on your house project. Okay, a Gantt chart or a bar chart. Gantt chart is the name of the man who invented this stuff 110 years ago or whenever. All right, so his name is stuck to the methodology. It's just a bar chart. But the very least you should do on your project, residential project, is this. Another alternative, and there, as I say, there are many tools. I've expanded this out. The example I've given is a little bit more detail, but this is critical path method. And of course, in my view, Microsoft have got a lot to answer for, because they've seen a commercial opportunity here, and some years ago they produced a product called Microsoft Project. So this is a computer software package. We'll do this stuff for you. Okay, it will draw Gantt charts and it will draw critical path diagrams. Okay, you put the activities in, you make judgments, and you put against a timeline. My problem I have with Microsoft Project is that for it to work, you have to have a really good understanding of construction methodology and construction logic. Because you know what computers do. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out. Okay? And Microsoft Project is a very, very good tool for filtering rubbish. So it will take the rubbish in, thank you, and it will spit it out, and it looks really, really professional. Oh look, it's produced my Gantt charts, it's produced my critical path, but the problem was that the input was rubbish. So the output, while it looks very professional and convincing, is not reliable. So the only way to get reliable information out is to make sure that your input is good, and that's when you need the experienced programmer or scheduler who understands the construction methodology that's being used. Right, I've had my little rave about Microsoft Project, but critical path is about finding the longest construction path through the project. If we start here and we go through the project, we do all of these things, and we get to the end and we finish the house. So what's the longest path through all of these activities to get to the finish? The longest path is the critical path. So if we delay items or activities on the critical path, we delay the project. If we can speed up activities on the critical path, we shorten the project. That's the basic theory. So identify the longest path through the project and manage that very carefully. Monitor that very carefully and try and keep that on place. So in this case here, this is a precedence diagram, but it's a form of critical path. These, I can't read it. I think these are the durations. The middle one, isn't it?
These are the per chart.
Yeah, per chart. Right, it's the way it's presented. So these are the durations. So I think that's 5. I can't read it. So this is 5. Okay. So 5. We go this way. This activity is here. It goes to this activity. 5 plus 5. And this one here is 15. So we finish here in 25 days. So we do this activity in 5 days, this activity in this 5 days, this activity in 15, total time 25 days. The other way to do that, other activities that we have to do is to go through this way. So we've got 5 there, 10 there, and 15 there. So to come through this way, to complete these activities, is 30 days. So that is the longest path of these two paths on this diagram. So through these activities, doing this A, C and D, is it? Is 30 days. That is, you can see it's in highlight, is the critical path. So we have to manage very, very carefully everything on that path, because that's 30 days. This one is 25. So on this path, we've actually got 5 days up our sleeve. 5 days float. Okay, so we can afford to delay things by 5 days on this path and still finish on time. But we can't on this path. So that's a critical path process. And as I say, yeah.
critical path 叫关键线路啊。如果看这2个线路呢，就说是长的那个线路是关键线路。你如果推迟任何一个，比如说10天变11天，你这个项目的这个工期就被推迟了。那上面那条线路呢是非关键线路，非关键线路这里面有签的叫做 flow， 就是可以用来产生秀的宇宙天。所以你在做项目的时候，你一定要把你的资源集中在关键线路上，你才会完成工期。那上面那个呢，它可以 delay 5天以内都不会影响，但是你 delay 5天以后，它变成关键线路，所以这很重要。所以这个关键线路法呢是非常广泛的应用在这个当你在做这个事情的时候。所以你任何的一件事一个项目也好，一部分的一个项目也好，你想提前完成，你就要在这关键线路上做文章，尽量把它说好。怎么说的呢？有的时候是把东西说好，比如说 PV 今天是第一次里面的2到4天完成，那你如果增加到4个工人，他可能就3天完成，所以他还要干啊。那我要想办法就好，我就来这个。但是呢，你的工期不是放PV的游戏，那你说我4天3天完成是吧？但是呢，我还可以一种做法，我 PV 还是等基本，但是呢，油漆工呢不是等 PV 结束了，我是油漆工呢等 PV 做完这一半的时候，在做那一半的时候，油漆就来油漆这一半，所以你的这个可以交叉时间，那你交叉时间也会是因为你的整个关键性会失望，所以当你 identify 你的关键点的时候，特别大的时候，然后你再找在上面去琢磨你怎么让它收获各种各样的方式。OK。
So these ways of managing the time on a project, these are a series. There's a lot of tools that you can use, and as I said in later sessions in the program, you'll be looking at these in more detail. My point is that it's possible on a house residential job, the conditions of contract required you to produce one of these, required you to produce one of those to satisfy the tender bid. You put in the schedule. All right, you did it. All right. So this is my schedule that I put in the contract, and you know what I do with it? I forget about it. How many times does that happen, particularly on a residential? It was something to satisfy the tender bid. It was something I did to win the job. It's something I sort of said, well, this is what we're going to do. But then it goes in under the carpet or goes in the cupboard. It's not used. So my point is, if you've prepared this, you should be using it. Take it out of the cupboard. Okay, you should be using it to monitor your project. Otherwise, it's a complete waste of time. And you are flying completely blind because you have no process in place to monitor your delivery. Remember, you want to win the next job from this person. You want to demonstrate your performance, that you are reliable, okay, that you deliver on what you say you're going to do. So you need to use these tools to ensure that your project is running on time, cost and quality. There's a whole lot of reports and monitoring reports that you can engage in, and there's a list of them there. So, project dashboard, you can have a high-level thing of one page where your project is sitting. Management progress reports, whether they're weekly or fortnightly. So if you're working for a large company, okay, the head office might want to know what's happening in your project. You can have daily reports. So you've got a site manager on site who is there every day, or a foreman. Okay, what's happened today? This is a record. Okay. Your contract, for example, might allow for an extension of time on the basis of wet weather. Oh, look, yes, I know we're late. We had a really, really wet June and July. We got stopped because of the wet weather. I want extra time. So you need records to establish how many days were wet. Oh, and by the way, you know that in July it rains a lot in Auckland. You should have allowed for it in your contract. So how many wet days in July are there? I don't know, right? But maybe it's 20, right? We know there's going to rain in Auckland 20 days in July. You should have allowed for that. So sorry, it only rained for 19. You're not going to get any extra allowance because it's wet weather. So these sorts of monitoring things will go on. So you have to establish the progress of your job, so daily reports. Hey, there's a whole lot of inspection checklists that you can use for monitoring progress. Checklists. Checklists for quality, checklists for safety. Okay, these things can be done on a daily basis or very, very regular. So use of checklists streamlines the process. So summary cost reports, risk reports. So it might be that you have a simple risk register. These are the risks on my project. And certainly in terms of safety, you will have to have a register of hazards. So hazards are a risk. So you go into any project now, the first thing you'll see is a hazard board as you go in. So those hazards have to be monitored on a daily basis because there may be new hazards that come up. So the assessment using checklists can maybe identify new hazards. Milestone schedule or look-ahead reports. Look-ahead reports. We have to plan for next week. So what is it that we're going to do next week? So this is what the schedule says. We need to plan ahead for next week. And my colleague would say, using look-ahead planning, you do not start an activity that you cannot go through and finish. So you do not start until you can get finished. So in other words, you don't stop that activity and start somewhere else. You keep it going continuously, continuous work. So the look-ahead planning is, can we actually, if we start this, can we continue to finish it? So that's just simple planning, but it is also about monitoring where you are currently and what you're going to do next. Hey, it's about time, Frank. I got through that very, very quickly. You've got the handouts there. We'll make available the electronic PowerPoint, so you've got access to those links. There's not much time for questions. I'm back in a couple of weeks. As I say, Frank's given me the boring pieces to do. I'd rather talk to you about other construction, but this is like a basic knowledge that you need to understand as a context. And I think I've got one message really for you, is that if you're in residential construction, you cannot avoid the Building Act and you cannot avoid having a contract. Because even if we've just got a handshake, behind it there is a whole lot of contract conditions that exist. And you have obligations to your client. And you cannot escape them, okay, if you want to stay in business. And Frank started the whole session talking about reputation and, you know, and valuing your credentials. It's why you're doing the course, is to get some credentials, to say, I have done this, you know, I have got this qualification. I understand these things. So going forward, you need to protect your reputation and credentials. Anyone can come into the construction business for a week. It takes a little bit of skill and effort to stay in it. So, over to Frank. I'll watch this because he's designed this terrible bloody case study for you. Got lots of homework to do.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
我们先有一个先 break 啊，我就放这个录像，这个录像是我们的太行业做的，大家有共同矛盾，大家然后我们可以 study 好吧？
So they wanted you to put that on for?
Okay, yeah.
Sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read. It undermines the writer's message.
Okay, it's going to be a series of